Good morning, everyone. It is June 21st, 2023. This is our regularly scheduled meeting for the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, our penultimate week known as that. Before we get moved over, I will note just at the outset that Chair Robbins is out today, so I will be chairing in his place. Why don't we get started with a roll call, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Ackerman.
Here.
Commissioner Cross.
Present.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Oath. Commissioner Ray. Commissioner Robbins. Mr. Chair, you have 4 out of 7 commissioners present.
Thank you very much. Moving along, I don't believe we had any public comments either written or submitted this week, so we will move on to commissioner comments. Do any commissioners have any comments for the good of the order? Commissioner Mesner.
Thank you. I wanted to update the commission on some legislation that was passed this last session, HB 231242, which does affect the COGCC and has some implications around produced water. And so just wanted to update you all on that. HB 231242 was passed, and it requires that the oil and gas operators report specified information on water use in oil and gas operations to the COGCC. It also requires that the commission adopt new rules and creates a consortium to study the use and recycling of produced water in oil and gas operations. A Colorado Produced Water Consortium aims to bring state and federal agencies, research institutions, and institutes of higher education, affected and interested NGOs, local government, affected industry, and others together to encourage the reuse and recycling of produced water and address barriers associated with the utilization of that produced water. The Colorado Produced Water Consortium will provide an informed path for the utilization of this water inside and potentially outside of the oil fields in Colorado. The outcomes of this effort will build upon Produced Water Consortium efforts nationally. There's both a Produced Water Consortium in New Mexico and there's a Produced Water Consortium in Texas, and will identify and address critical scientific, legislative, and regulatory knowledge gaps needed to develop policies that are protective of public health, welfare, safety, the environment, and wildlife resources in Colorado. The primary goal of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium is to help reduce the consumption of fresh water within oil and gas operations. Responsibilities also include making recommendations around number 1, developing an informed path for reuse and recycling of produced water inside and potentially outside of oil and gas operations in the state. Number 2, to develop measures to address barriers associated with the utilization of produced water. And number 3, to develop research to evaluate analytical and toxicological methods employed during produced water treatment and assess tools used to evaluate produced water and its potential for use both inside and outside of the oil field. The Colorado Produced Water Consortium is comprised of 31 members. There is a governing body that is appointed by the executive director of the Department of Natural Resources. That governing body has been appointed. It consists of 1 representative from COGCC, which is myself, 1 representative from the State Division of Water Resources, which is Tracy Kozloff, and then 1 representative from CDPHE, which is Tricia Oath. In addition, the governing body actually appoints a number of the consortium membership. So upcoming here by July 1st, we'll be appointing 4 representatives from state or federal agencies, with at least 1 coming from CDPHE, 4 individuals from research institutions or state institutions of higher education with expertise in produced water, 4 individuals from environmental NGOs with experience in produced water, 4 individuals from oil and gas industry, with one each from the DJ Basin, Piceance Basin, San Juan Basin, and Raton Basins. 2 individuals with local government, elected local government officials from areas with reuse and recycling of produced water. And 4 individuals with expertise and experience in produced water. In addition to those appointments, the Senate President will appoint 2 individuals from NGOs that work on or advocate for environmental justice or conservation, and 1 individual that either works with or advocates for disproportionately impacted communities or communities of color, or resides in a disproportionately impacted community. And the Speaker of the House appoints 1 individual from an NGO that works on or advocates for environmental justice or conservation, and 2 individuals that either work with or advocates for disproportionately impacted communities or communities of color, or resides in a disproportionately impacted community. The consortium does intend to meet monthly for the first year as per the legislation, and then at least quarterly in subsequent years. There will be 1 full-time director for the Colorado Produced Water Consortium that will be employed by the Department of Natural Resources. There will also be an additional director of research associated with the Produced Water Consortium hired at a later date. That position description and job announcement for that director position will be coming forthright. The responsibilities of the director would be the staff lead for the Colorado Produced Water Consortium. Responsibilities would include, amongst other things, administration, coordination of meetings and membership, grant writing and budgeting, contracting for analysis and studies, and providing recommendations from the consortium to agencies and the legislature for policy rulemakings and legislation to promote reuse, recycling, and beneficial use of produced water. To give you a little bit of an idea of the consortium responsibilities as per the legislation, because at the end of this presentation, I do want to encourage folks to apply to be on the consortium. But there's a number of different deliverables and a pretty tight timeline that's associated with developing the consortium, and for the consortium to provide certain deliverables associated with the legislation. On July 1st of 2023, we're required to have the governing body and the membership of the consortium appointed. We're hoping by August 15th to have the director hired. By May 1st, the consortium should make recommendations on how state and federal agencies can better coordinate regulatory policies related to produced water. By September 1st, 2024, the consortium should develop different topics for discussion related to produced water. By November 1st, 2024, the consortium should make recommendations on any legislation or agency rules needed to remove barriers to the safe reuse and recycling of produced water, taking into consideration environmental justice issues, legal issues, testing standards and treatment, research gaps in treatment of produced water, including emissions, water sharing agreements, and infrastructure and storage of produced water, including pits. By December 1st of 2024, the consortium should develop long and short-term produced water reuse and recycling goals for the state. And that's a basin by basin determination. By March 1st, 2024, the consortium should develop guidance documents and case studies to promote best practices for in-field reuse and recycling. By July 1st, 2024, the consortium is tasked with analyzing and developing a report on current produced water infrastructure, storage, and treatment facilities across the state, with an emphasis in the DJ Basin. By August 1st, 2024, the consortium is tasked with analyzing and reporting on volume of produced water in each basin available for reuse and recycling in comparison to the total volume of water necessary for the completion activities and new oil and gas activities. By September 1st, 2024, the consortium is tasked with analyzing and reporting on infrastructure, storage, and technology necessary to achieve different levels of reuse and recycling of produced water in oil and gas basins across the state, again, with the emphasis in the DJ Basin. And by July 1st, 2025, the consortium is tasked with evaluating analytical and toxicological methods employed during produced water treatment and assess tools used to evaluate produced water and its potential for use outside of the oil field. In addition, the consortium will be required to provide annual reports to legislative committees and to SMART Act hearings. Specifically for COGCC, or soon to be ECMC, the responsibilities per HB 23-1242, in addition to the development of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium, is that by September 1st, 2023, operators will have new reporting requirements around water, fresh water and produced water, including that they should report to the commission on a monthly per well basis. Number one, volume and barrels of all fresh water used downhole. Number two, volume and barrels of all reused and recycled water used downhole. Number three, volume and barrels of all produced water that is produced from the well. Number four, volume of produced water that is removed from location for disposal, including disposal method and disposal location. Number five, volume and barrels of all produced water that is produced from a well and is reused or recycled on another well at the same location, or removed from location for reuse and recycling at a different location. By January 2nd, 2024, operators shall report to the commission on a quarterly basis volume and barrels of fresh water used and the categorical source of that fresh water as either industrial, commercial, municipal, or agricultural. Number two, volume and barrels of reused or recycled water and the source of that water. Number three, volume and barrels of disposed produced water and the disposal method and location. Number four, volume of in barrels of produced water that is removed from location for reuse and recycling. And number five, the volume of produced water, of total produced water in barrels. By December 31st of 2024, the commission shall adopt rules to require a statewide reduction in freshwater usage and a corresponding increase in the usage of reused and recycled produced water at oil and gas locations. And the legislation does indicate that the rules shall consider number one, data and reports filed as part of the new reporting requirements. And number two, recommendations from the Colorado Produced Water Consortium that get developed as per the consortium's deliverables. The legislation does indicate that the rules shall include number one, requirements for new OGDPs and substantial modifications to existing permits to include a plan specifying the methods and locations of treatment of produced water, quantifying reused or recycled produced water used in place of fresh water, describing emissions controls associated with produced water treatment and storage, and any other requirements the commission determines necessary for the implementation of the stated goals. Number two, the rules shall include a prohibition against placement of new centralized produced water storage or treatment facilities in disproportionately impacted communities. Number three, a requirement that the operator quantify and report for each oil and gas location the vehicle miles traveled in relation to fresh and produced water management, including reused and recycled, including reuse and recycling. Number four, a requirement for each oil and gas production basin, an iterative and consistent increase in the use and recycling of produced water without increasing associated emissions. Number five, establish based on recommendations from the consortium an iterative and consistent schedule of dates that will significantly increase the usage of reused or recycled produced water and decrease the amount of fresh water used in oil and gas operations, while ensuring the protection of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. Number six, the rules may include oil and gas basin-specific benchmarks to comply with the above requirements. And number seven, the commission will include cumulative impacts of water in its cumulative impacts reporting. And so that's a lot, and there's a lot of information there, but I wanted to make sure that the commissioners were aware of this and aware of the work that's ongoing. And I also want to make sure that the public understands what's happening as per the legislation and the work that's being done on this. You know, all of these things are already being worked on, and we're currently in the process of recruiting individuals who may want to serve on the consortium. And so there will be a press release going out shortly indicating that we are looking for individuals to serve on the consortium. And there'll be a web page on both Department of Natural Resources website as well as the COGCC website indicating more information about the consortium and the responsibilities that membership would entail, as well as a link to a Google form to apply to the consortium. We will be taking applications through June 26th, and then we'll make appointments as per the legislation by July 1st. And so that's my update on the Colorado Produced Water Consortium and some of the work that's gone on as per HB 23-1242. Happy to answer any questions that commissioners may have. But just wanted to get that in front of folks. Also happy to forward the commissioners additional information and on the consortium itself. So.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Commissioner Messner, for that update. And I appreciate your ongoing hard work on this, as well as the hard work by the others of the governing board. Do any other commissioners have any questions for Commissioner Messner? Seeing none, I'll make one comment as well for HB 22-1348 dealing with chemical disclosure. Just as an update for everyone, the Office of Information Technology is still developing forms to comply with 1348, and so those are in process, and we will continue to provide updates as those forms become ready and available. All right, are there any other commissioner comments? Okay, seeing none, can we move on to consent agenda? Do any commissioners have questions or comments on the consent agenda? Seeing none, do we have any motions?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? All right, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda passes. All right, moving on down the docket, we next have docket number 221200381, which is an OGDP from PDC Energy for the Bubba and Trippet OGDP. Before we get started, I believe we have some members from staff who want to have some clarifying comments, and I believe we just had Ms. Weber elevated. So Ms. Weber, I would encourage you to provide those updates.
Hello, my name is Kira Weber. Greetings, everyone. I would like to provide a few points of clarification as per the director's recommendation for PDC's Bubba Trippet OGDP. In the administrative consideration section of the director's recommendation, it is stated there is a second residential building unit within 2,001 feet of the planned wellheads equipment for the Bubba location. This is incorrect. There is only one RBU within 2,000 feet of the proposed location, and that residential building unit will be 2,001 feet from the closest wellhead or equipment. Additionally, there is an inconsistency between the COA on the director's recommendation and the Form 2A. The 2,000-foot distance in this instance is referring to the wellheads and equipment, not the working pad surface. PDC has requested that the condition of approval number 1 be altered to state, to demonstrate compliance with Rule 604B, within 10 days of SPUD, PDC will submit to the location ID number via Form 4 Sundry Notice a post-construction survey showing the measured distance from the edge of the wellheads to the residential building unit that is reported to be 2,001 feet from the planned wellheads as approved on the Form 2A. Staff has no objection to the proposed COA language outlined by PDC. However, staff would like to suggest that the measured distance from the nearest site equipment to the RB residential building unit should be included. Staff is proposing the following language for this COA. To demonstrate compliance with 604B within 10 days of SPUD, PDC will submit to the location ID number via Form 4 Sundry a post-construction survey showing the measured distance from the edge of the wellheads and from the edge of the nearest site equipment to the residential building unit that is reported to be 2,001 feet from the planned wellheads as approved on the Form 2A. In the public safety and welfare consideration section, it is incorrectly stated that there is a residential building unit 1,503 feet east of the proposed Bubba location. This residential building unit will actually be 1,705 feet from the proposed Bubba location. The residential building units described as being located 1,301 feet to the southeast and 1,569 feet to the southwest are for the proposed Trivet location. Thank you for your time.
Perfect. Thank you very much for those clarifications and updates. Do any commissioners have comments for Ms. Weber? Seeing none, next we will recognize Jason Maxey. And I'm not seeing him on here yet, but we will have Weld County comment.
And Mr. Chair, we've not been able to locate Mr. Maxey in the participant list. Mr. Maxey, if you are in the meeting and would like to raise your hand, we will get you in as soon as possible. But Mr. Chair, assuming we're not able to locate Mr. Maxey or another representative of Weld County, we can move on to PDC's presentation. If they join later in the course of the hearing, we can then bring Weld County in for their comments.
Perfect. And I'm not seeing any hands raised or anything in the participant list. So we will move on with that. So recognizing Mr. Krishala, if it's okay for Weld County to step in there, why don't we begin with your presentation? Yeah. Why don't we begin with your presentation?
Great, yeah, and if Mr. Maxey appears here shortly, I'm happy to pause and allow him to make his comments to y'all. Good morning, Acting Chair Cross and Commissioners, Director Murphy and staff. My name is Joe Krishala with Wellborn, Sullivan, Meck and Tooley, and I represent PDC Energy, and I'm pleased to present the Bubba Trippet Oil and Gas Development Plan. I'd like to first thank staff for all their work on this application, and would like to thank Ms. Weber for the clarifications on the director recommendation. Presenting today for PDC are Vanessa Chase, the regulatory manager, Corey Shaheen, senior surface land negotiator, Meredith Knauf, air quality policy advisor, and then we also have available to answer commissioner questions Zach Weisenfeld, DHS professional, Brian Murray, Director of DJ Planning and Well Execution, Taylor Holbert, Land Negotiator, and Brian DeRose, Surface Land Manager. Mr. DeRose will be operating the PowerPoint for PDC here in a moment once I turn this over to Ms. Chase. PDC's application requests that the Commission approve an oil and gas development plan that covers approximately 4,770 acres within Township 3 North, Range 66 West in Weld County, Colorado. The proposed development is planned from 2 oil and gas locations with a total of 66 horizontal wells. The 2 locations are the Bubba Federal Pad and the Trippet Pad. These locations were selected following a robust alternative location analysis, evaluating 11 alternatives with 7 fully evaluated as technically feasible alternatives. Both locations are within the mineral development area and are located on fee surface in a rural part of Weld County. Weld County is the relevant local government and has approved the Bubba Federal Pad at 1041 WOGLA 22-0037 and the Trippet Pad at 1041 WOGLA 22-0038. There are no proximate local governments. PDC's leasehold covers more than 45% of the mineral interest in the proposed drilling and spacing units and wellbore spacing units, and therefore it has the right to develop. With respect to spacing, PDC has requested approval of a companion Rule 305 drilling and spacing unit application. That application requests the Commission establish 2 drilling and spacing units and 4 wellbore spacing units that would be located along the northern and southern boundaries of those respective drilling and spacing units. The Bubba Federal Drilling and Spacing Unit and associated wellbore spacing units contain federal minerals which underlie a railroad right-of-way. PDC has a lease with the Bureau of Land Management that covers that mineral interest and has obtained its federal APDs for the Bubba Federal wells. PDC engaged with the BLM on the proposed spacing, specifically with respect to the unit boundary setbacks. Based on those discussions, PDC and the BLM agreed to modify the unit boundary setbacks from those originally proposed, and PDC amended the drilling and spacing unit application consistent therewith. PDC maintains that the proposed spacing and the unit boundary setbacks satisfy Rule 305B and the Conservation Act, including the protection of parental rights. With regard to the locations, PDC proposes to develop these units that cover 4,770 acres from just the two well pads. The first being the Bubba Federal Pad. It's located on fee surface. PDC has a surface use agreement with that surface owner. The pad will develop an approximate 1,320 acre DSU and two WSUs, one covering approximately 270 acres and the other approximately 210 acres with a total of 18 horizontal wells. As you will hear, PDC considered 5 alternative sites and fully evaluated 3 technically feasible alternatives for this location. The selected Bubba Federal Pad is the best alternative, with only one receptor within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface. That one receptor is an RBU within 2,000 feet of the pad. However, the wells and the equipment on the pad are to be located more than 2,000 feet from the RBU, which does satisfy Rule 604B3. The Commission's review is therefore pursuant to Rule 301A, and it can and should accept the findings of the Commission staff as set forth in the Director's recommendation for the approval of the Bubba Federal Pad. The other pad is the Trippet Pad. It is also located on fee surface, which is owned by PDC. The pad will develop an approximate 3,040 acre DSU and 2 WSUs, one covering approximately 390 acres and the other approximately 360 acres, with a total of 48 wells on the pad. As you will hear, PDC considered 6 alternative sites, fully evaluated 4 technically feasible alternatives, and selected the Trippet Pad as the best of these alternatives, with only 2 receptors within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface. The receptors are 2 RBUs within 2,000 feet. However, the owners signed informed consents, which satisfies Rule 604B1. Thus, the Commission's review is pursuant to Rule 301A, and it can and should accept the findings of the Commission staff as set forth in the Director's recommendation for approval of the Trippet Pad. As you will hear, PDC's deployment of its full suite of best management practice to these 2 proposed locations satisfies Rule 301A, such that the proposed operations will protect and minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, and the environment, and will also protect against adverse environmental impacts to air, water, soil, and biological resources. Some highlights of the best management practices include line-powered electric drilling rig, electrified production equipment, tankless facilities, 3-phase pipeline takeaway, quiet frac fleet, strategically located sound walls, both near field and perimeter, and state-of-the-art remote monitoring, including LDAR for leak detection and remote shut-in capability. There's also air monitoring in compliance with AQCC Reg 7. With respect to wildlife, needed location is within high priority habitat. PDC has given proper notice pursuant to Rules 504A and 303E1. No petitions or interventions were received. On June 14th, 2023, the Director issued the Director recommendation, which recommended the Commission approve the Bubba Trippet OGDP, and we request that Commission take note of the corrections that we agree with as presented by Ms. Weber. That being said, I do need to confer with my client on the proposed revisions by Ms. Weber to the condition of approval number 1. With that, this application does satisfy the Conservation Act and Commission rules, specifically Rule 604B1 and 604B3, as well as Rule 301A. With these carefully selected locations and BMPs to best protect and minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, and the environment, as well as wildlife resources and the protection of air, soil, water, and biological resources. PDC respectfully requests that the Commission adopt the Director's recommendation and approve this application. And with that, I pass the baton to Ms. Chase, who will begin PDC's presentation.
And Mr. Pijawa, apologies for the interruption, but we do have a representative from Weld County available, Ms. Kelly Holiday. If you'd like to hear from them now, we can do that, or wait until after PDC's presentation.
I think we should hear from Weld County now, and we can resume our presentation when they're concluded.
Super. We'll bring them in one moment, please.
Ms. Holiday has been elevated. The floor is yours.
Good morning, commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to speak for a couple of minutes about Weld County's WOGLA process regarding PDC's Bubba Trippett Oil and Gas Development Plan. 2A comments were submitted to the COGCC on April 20th and were included in the director's recommendation. The Oil and Gas Energy Department held a pre-application meeting for the Bubba location on March 9th of 2022 and for the Trippett location on March 23rd of 2022. Attendees for the Bubba location included PDC staff, Weld County staff, COGCC, and CPW. And for the Trippett, PDC staff, Weld County staff, and the COGCC. The 1041 WOGLA application was received on December 27th of 2022, and Weld County did not receive any public comments or applications for intervention for either of these locations. The 1041 WOGLA hearing was held on March 30th of 2023 and approved by the Weld County hearing officer. The final order has been recorded with Weld County's clerk and recorder and was noticed in the Greeley Tribune on April the 12th of 2023. PDC's former Stagecoach location, which was mentioned as part of the director's recommendation, is already expired through Weld County's process and Weld County's records, and Weld County supports approval of this permit. So that's all I have today. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Holiday. Does anyone have questions for Ms. Holiday? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Holiday, for being here and making the presentation. I read through the process, the Weld County WOGLA process and the review of this application. And there seemed to be comments that were provided during that process from an irrigation company called Frico. And it was a little unclear in at least the information that I had read as far as how that ultimately was resolved and whether or not there's still concerns from the irrigation company on this application.
So the irrigation, sure. Frico was a referral agency on the Trippett application specifically, as they are within that 2,000 feet of the oil and gas location. Part of our review process, we have an extensive report, drainage report and analysis done by Weld County engineers on those drainage plans. And it was determined that the flows are not going toward the Frico ditch, and there should be no impacts to the ditch, as well as some of the other comments from the ditch company were regarding the ditch road, and that should PDC be utilizing that ditch road, that they would have an agreement with Frico, and nothing within the application indicated any use of the ditch road or that PDC had any intention of utilizing the ditch road or crossing the ditch. So I think all concerns that Frico had have been alleviated through the Weld County process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do commissioners have other questions for Ms. Holiday? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation today, and we'll maybe ask that you stay available in case questions come up, but I appreciate your time.
Okay, I will be. Thank you.
And Mr. Purcell, I will kick it back to you now.
Thank you. And before we get started on the presentation, we were hoping that Ms. Weber could be elevated again, and just to repeat the clarifications or the proposed COA number 1. That way we can consider it while we're going through the presentation and ideally be able to agree to it at the conclusion thereof.
Certainly, Ms. Larson, can we, oh, I see her elevated now. Ms. Weber, you are recognized.
Hi, I'm sorry, I only heard the first half of that before I was elevated. Could you please repeat?
Sure, we were hoping that you had seen our written draft of our revisions to the COA 1, and we had listened to what you had presented, and we tried taking notes, and we just want to make sure that we had it correct. And so and I believe that the additions that you had suggested were that the measurements would be from the wellheads and the equipment, but we just wanted to be certain that we understood it correctly, so that way we can consider it during the presentation and then be prepared to propose any other revisions or just accept it as you drafted it.
Okay. Would you like me to reread?
Yes, please.
To demonstrate compliance with Rule 604B within 10 days of SPUD, PDC will submit to the location ID number via Form 4 Sundry Notice a post-construction survey showing the measured distance from the edge of the wellheads and from the edge of the nearest site equipment to the residential building unit that is reported to be 2,001 feet from the planned wellheads as approved on the Form 2A.
Great. Thank you very much. And I will turn this over to Ms. Chase for PDC's presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Vanessa Chase, Regulatory Manager for PDC. I'm going to kick off this presentation with an overview of the Bubba Trippett OGDP details. Next slide. This slide represents the OGDP timeline from development conception to the hearing today. PDC initially started planning development within the Bubba Trippett OGDP area in 2017 with surface owner consultations and signed surface owner agreements in 2018. After the mission change rulemaking, PDC redesigned the development in this area to align with the current rules more accurately. A pre-application meeting was held with Weld County in March of 2022, and subsequently the OGDP was submitted. The OGDP passed completeness within 4 months of submittal and received a director recommendation of approval in June of 2023. The Bubba Trippett OGDP is comprised of 2 surface locations that are farther than 1 mile from high priority habitats, schools, childcare centers, water supply areas, disproportionately impacted communities, and there are no impacts to floodplains or wetlands. The Bubba location has a signed surface owner agreement, and PDC owns the surface for the Trippett location. The development of these locations provides the opportunity for 88 legacy wells to be plugged and reclaimed. This reclaiming activity would result in a total of 82.2 acres given back to the community. The Bubba Trippett OGDP proposal includes a total of 66 wells that will be drilled from 1.5 to 2.25 miles. PDC has pushed the operational limits and is proposing 4,770 mineral acres to be developed from 2 surface locations. The schedule for this development is essentially a one and done operational timeline that will start with the construction of the Trippett location in December of 2023, with drilling commencing thereafter. There will be a 1.25 month gap between drilling and completion operations. The Bubba location is anticipated to start construction in May of 2024, with drilling commencing in November and completion operations starting in March of 2025. This leaves a 1 month gap between drilling and completion operations. The short delay in between operations is due to only being able to run one drilling rig between the 2 locations due to the electricity capacity. The Bubba location falls within the siting requirements of Rule 604B3. All wells and production equipment will be located more than 2,000 feet from any residential building unit. There is 1 residential building unit within 2,000 feet of the oil and gas location area, in which PDC has had extensive conversations with, and you will hear further details later in the presentation. The Trippett location falls within the siting requirements of Rule 604B1. PDC has obtained informed consent from the 2 residential building units located within 2,000 feet of the oil and gas location area. I will now turn the presentation over to Corey Sheehan, PDC's Senior Surface Land Negotiator, to discuss the details of the extensive ALA conducted for the Bubba and Trippett locations.
Thanks, Vanessa, and good morning, Commissioners. I wanted to start this portion of the presentation with a little bit of the history regarding these 2 proposed locations, discuss the robust ALA process that PDC utilizes when evaluating alternate locations, and explain specifically how we arrived at the conclusion that the Bubba Federal and Trippet locations are the preferred and least potentially impactful locations in which to develop the proposed mineral development units. As you'll see over the course of the next several slides, the ALA process is a process that PDC firmly believes in, and a process that works to effectively mitigate impacts to public health, safety, welfare, environment, and wildlife resources. While the ALA process is not necessarily a new process to PDC, it is a process that we took a deeper dive into after the new local and state rulemakings in 2020. These rulemakings provided PDC and the industry as a whole with a more thorough approach to responsible mineral development in the DJ Basin. Next slide, please. As you'll see in the bottom left of this slide, PDC assessed a total of 5 alternates for the Bubba Federal unit, with 3 being fully evaluated, and 6 total alternates for the Trippet unit, with 4 being fully evaluated. Now, when we say fully evaluated, this means that PDC did not find any immediate receptors or reasons why these sites would be more impactful than the proposed. So we conducted a complete ALA survey analysis on them, while the others that were not fully evaluated had receptors or impacts that were immediately identified to be more impactful, thus eliminating the need for PDC to conduct any further research on them. So what are these impacts or receptors that PDC considers when we are conducting our site selection or ALA process? In the bottom right corner of this slide, you will see a list of some of the most important impacts that we look for. These considerations include, but are not limited to, proximity to building units, operational feasibility. Does this location meet the standards of our site-by-site risk assessment for development? Impact to future land use. Will this site have negative impacts on future development, or are there pending development plans in the area? If this site is being planned on lands that are intended for long-term farming operations, how will this surface owner and/or tenant farmer be negatively impacted by the site both during the operations phase as well as the production phase? Proximity to cultural features, environmental concerns such as wildlife corridors, raptor or eagle nests, prairie dogs, burrowing owls, wetlands, floodplains, designated surface water, and much more. Access to location. Does PDC believe we can construct or utilize an existing access that is safe with minimal impacts, not only the surface owner, but the surrounding community as well? Surface owner negotiations. PDC wants to be a partner with our stakeholders, and these locations have to be locations that not only work for PDC, but work for the surface owner as well. Geology. Does the subsurface structure formations complement the surface location in which to safely and adequately develop hydrocarbons? And last but not least, consolidation. Next slide, please. Based on Weld County's pre-application meeting held in March of 2022, and in collaboration with Weld County, COGCC, and CPW, 3 potential alternates were identified for the proposed Bubba Federal development. Now, before I jump into these 3 alternates, it is important to highlight the historical evolution of the Bubba Federal development area and the steps PDC has taken in an effort to consolidate our development plans for this unit. The Bubba Federal unit was initially planned as 2 separate units dating back to 2017, when PDC first began assessing the area and development strategies, with 2 separate locations planned in which to develop these units. One of these locations was alternate 4 that you see on this slide, located along the east side of the proposed mineral development unit. The other location was situated on the same property as the proposed location. Through preliminary discussions with both Weld County and COGCC, and due to concerns with the potential impacts associated with alternate location 4, it was asked of PDC to take a second look at our development plans to see if there was an option to consolidate these development plans into one location, and thus eliminate the need for alternate 4. What we are looking at today is a result of PDC's commitment to reassessing our development plans for this area, and ultimately our success in creating a development strategy that consolidated 2 separate units and 2 separate locations into one, believed to be the preferred and least potentially impactful location in which to develop the proposed mineral development unit. While we're on this slide, I did want to note that once this unit was consolidated, we identified only 3 areas near or within the mineral development unit that had portions of lands that were over 2,000 feet from the nearest RBUs. These areas are alternates 1, located on the west side of the unit, alternate 2 on the south central portion of the unit, and the lands in which alternate 3 and the proposed location are located on. These are generally the first areas PDC focuses on when assessing areas in which are the least potentially impactful for oil and gas operations. With that, let's take a look at the 3 alternates that were evaluated for the Bubba Federal unit, as well as the proposed location. Next slide, please. The first alternate location considered was a location situated on the western end of the proposed mineral development unit. After conducting a thorough analysis of the area, PDC confirmed a minimum of 8 RBUs would be within 2,000 feet of this location. with the closest RBU being about 1,400 feet from the working pad surface. Additionally, PDC recognized potential impacts with the access to this location, being that the access would be in much closer proximity to the existing RBUs than the proposed location's access. Lastly, in consulting with the surface owner of the subject property, the owner expressed that he was not interested in an oil and gas location on this property due to the fact that it would have severe short and long-term impacts to the current and future farming operations on the subject property, being that the location would impede upon about 50% of his irrigable farm ground. Next slide, please. Alternate 2 was another area that was identified to have portions of lands over 2,000 feet from existing RBUs, located near the south central portion of the mineral development unit. Again, while this area had portions of lands over 2,000 feet from RBUs, once PDC conducted a thorough analysis of the lands and overlaid the location size needed for this unit, we confirmed that this location would have at least 2 RBUs within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface. Additionally, similar to alternate location 1, there was no way to design a location on this property that didn't create severe impacts to current and future farming operations on the subject property, as this location would have impeded upon the existing irrigation pivot's ability to operate in a 360-degree manner, even once the wells entered the production phase. This location would also require twice the number of wells, leading to longer operational times on pad in order to effectively develop this unit. Next slide. The last alternate that was thoroughly assessed was toward the eastern edge of the proposed unit. This was an area within or near the mineral development unit that had portions of land over 2,000 feet from existing RBUs. But similar to the last 2 alternates we looked at, once PDC conducted our official ALA survey, it was confirmed that at least 5 RBUs would be within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface. PDC also consulted with the surface owner of the subject property regarding their interest in an oil and gas location, and the owner provided written notice to PDC that this proposal is not of interest to them and would have negative impacts to their current and future business plans on the property. Next slide. Now that we have discussed each of the alternates that were looked at for the Bubba Federal Unit Development Plan, I would like to go over the specific details of the proposed location, a location in which both PDC and Weld County have determined to be the preferred and least potentially impactful location in which to develop the proposed mineral unit. The location is outside of designated high priority habitat, no surface occupancy, wetland, and floodplain areas. This location is not located within a disproportionately impacted community and is not located near a school or childcare facility. PDC has an executed surface use agreement with the owner of the subject property, with an emphasis on isolating the location of the southwest corner of the subject property in an effort to minimize impacts to current and future farming operations, as well as obtain the greatest distance from existing RBUs that was operationally safe and feasible for PDC. You will see on this slide that we do have surface water identified just south of the proposed location, which is a designated irrigation pond for the sod farm operations on the adjacent property. PDC conducted a third-party analysis to confirm that this pond is protected by a substantial elevation difference from the proposed location, and drainage plans were designed to drain away from these surface waters. You will also see on this map areas identified as wetlands to the southeast of our proposed location. Again, PDC worked with a third-party environmental specialist to confirm that these wetland areas have been altered by the adjacent owner's farming and/or sod operations, and there are no longer any characteristics or evidence of wetlands present in this area. Now, I did want to take a couple minutes to discuss the closest RBU to the proposed location, which is located 1,705 feet to the east of the proposed working pad surface. While this RBU is within 2,000 feet from the working pad surface, they are over 2,000 feet from the nearest piece of permanent equipment associated with the proposed location. PDC went to great lengths to achieve this, working with multiple departments internally to understand our risk tolerance with wellhead spacing, location size, facility equipment, setbacks from wells, and much more. While our main objective was and always is to create a location with 0 RBUs within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface, it is imperative that we do not sacrifice operational safety in order to do so. Now, due to the fact that this RBU was over 2,000 feet from any permanent equipment associated with the proposed location, the informed consent requirement was not triggered per COGCC rules and regulations. However, this does not mean PDC did not believe it was necessary to consult extensively with the owners of the subject RBU and ensure that while they were not asked to sign an informed consent, through our multiple consultations, they were provided with thorough information, much the same as the information included in the informed consent packet. highlighting PDC's proposed operations, projected operational timelines, and BMPs associated with the site. PDC is a firm believer that a big part of our social license to operate includes extensive outreach and outreach that is conducted early and often. While this RBU was over 2,000 feet from any permanent equipment, we did not see this as an exception to our outreach efforts, but as evidence of PDC's efforts to design locations that are the least potentially impactful. I will go into more details regarding the extensive outreach conducted with this specific RBU later in this presentation. Next slide, please. We'll now look at the proposed TripIt development and the alternate locations that were identified and thoroughly evaluated in order to determine the proposed location to be the preferred and in which to develop the proposed unit. Again, PDC initially identified 6 potential alternates for this proposed unit, and after quickly ruling 2 out due to several identified receptors, we conducted a complete ALA survey on 4 of those 6 locations. The 2 alternates that were quickly ruled out as potential locations for this unit were alternates 5 and 6. While a preliminary assessment determined them to be potential options for an oil and gas location, a desktop review of these locations identified several receptors, including substantially more RBUs within 2,000 feet than other alternates, mapped wetland areas, access challenges, and being located on the same property discussed earlier in the BUBBA presentation, with the same surface owner who provided written notice to PDC that they were not interested in an oil and gas location on their property. While we're on this slide, I'd like to provide a little color on the historical evolution of the TripIt site as well. The TripIt unit was initially planned for 3 separate units with 3 separate oil and gas locations to effectively develop them. Preliminary due diligence on these locations dates back to 2017. The SB 181 regulations provided PDC an opportunity to reassess these locations and our development plans to determine if there was a less impactful approach to developing these units, which ultimately led to the consolidated development plan we're looking at today. Again, reducing PDC's overall oil and gas footprint within the project area. Next slide. Here we have depicted only the TripIt alternates with receptors included for reference. And with that, we'll now take a closer look at each of the alternates assessed for the TripIt development, as well as the proposed location. Next slide, please. Alternate 1 was one of 2 locations on the east side of the proposed unit that PDC assessed due to the preliminary data gathered in this area, showing slightly less RBUs within 2,000 feet of the proposed location. While this location appeared to be less impactful at face value, multiple factors led PDC to determine this location to be unsuitable for an oil and gas location. The first and most important factor was the surface owner's disinterest in an oil and gas location on the property. The site would need to be isolated to one of the corners of their property that you see on the map in order to accommodate future development plans. Pushing the site south would have put this location in closer proximity to the RBU that you can see to the south on the map and in closer proximity to an active bald eagle's nest, while shifting the location north would have put this location closer to existing RBUs that are in close proximity to 2 existing PDC locations that just recently entered the production phase. This location would also have utilized the same haul route of those 2 recently developed locations. The general feedback that we received from landowners in this area is that they had no issues with the production phase of the 2 existing oil and gas locations, but would prefer to not have to deal with potential impacts from a 3rd site being drilled in close proximity to them. Next slide, please. Alternate 2 was similar to alternate 1 in the sense that preliminary assessments showed this area to potentially have less impacts than the proposed. However, with a 3.25 mile long unit, PDC would have had to position this location somewhere near the central eastern portion of the property to maintain our feasible operational capabilities. The owner had concerns with this due to the impacts it would have on future development of the property. Had PDC explored moving the site north or south on property, we would have had been substantially closer to RBUs, substantially more closer to RBUs than the proposed. This location was also located in close proximity to the two previously mentioned PDC locations that recently entered the production phase. And PDC recognized the same concerns from the community related to alternate location 1. Next slide, please. Alternate location 3 was the location that was originally assessed prior to PDC consolidating the TripIt unit to 1 location. PDC executed a surface use agreement with its owner and had plans to develop the northern portion of the proposed unit from this location. Through our reassessment of this location and the development area, we identified the several potential receptors that you see on the screen, including 5 RBUs within 2,000 feet and 1 RBU less than 500 feet from the location. Next slide, please. Alternate 4 was another one of the 3 original locations in which PDC intended to develop the southern portion of the proposed unit as we see it today. Like alternate 3, PDC obtained a surface use agreement from the owner for this location. However, the location was reassessed and several potential impacts were noted in regards to this location. We determined this location to have at least 6 RBUs within 2,000 feet, 4 being within 1,000 feet of the working pad surface. Next slide, please. Now that we have looked at the 4 alternates that PDC assessed through our coordination with Weld County, COGCC, and CPW at the Weld County pre-application meeting, I'd like to share the specific details regarding the proposed location for the Trippett development, a location which both PDC and Weld County have determined to be the preferred location in which to develop the Trippett unit. The proposed Trippett location is a culmination of PDC's continued efforts to consolidate our operations and maximize mineral development from a single location. PDC is the surface owner of the subject property. The property location has 2 RBUs within 2,000 feet, both of which are over 1,300 feet from the working pad surface. The proposed location is outside of high priority habitat, no surface occupancy, floodplain, and wetland areas. This location is not located within a disproportionately impacted community and not located near a school or child care facility. I think it is important to also note that one of the first steps PDC took after purchasing this property was addressing some of the community's concerns with the pre-existing visual impacts of the old rundown turkey sheds that were located on this property when PDC purchased it. PDC acknowledged these concerns, and in our continued efforts to be a good neighbor and partner within the communities in which we live and work in, we made immediate plans to remove and properly dispose of these abandoned turkey sheds depicted by the black X's you see on the map, reclaiming this land to what is currently planned for agricultural use. Next slide, please. Now that we have taken an in-depth look at the 2 proposed locations associated with this OGDP, as well as the alternates that were assessed and associated with each, I'd like to provide an overview of the extensive neighborhood outreach that was conducted for both the Bubba and Trippett proposed locations. Next slide. On this slide, we have a side-by-side comparison of both the Bubba and Trippett locations, depicting the existing RBUs within 2,000 feet of each. Now, I'd first like to focus on the Bubba location depicted on the left side of the screen. As previously mentioned, the Bubba location has 1 RBU within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface. However, this RBU is over 2,000 feet from the nearest wellhead and/or piece of production facility equipment associated with the site. Therefore, the informed consent requirement was not triggered per COGCC rules and regulations. PDC did not look at this as an opportunity to avoid the informed consent process, but as an opportunity to design a location that, per the rules and regulations, would be the most protective of public health, safety, welfare, environment, and wildlife resources. While we worked extensively to modify this location to completely eliminate RBUs from within 2,000 feet, we could not sacrifice operational safety in doing so. Regardless, PDC still believed it was necessary to conduct consultations with not only this RBU, but some of the other RBU owners just outside 2,000 feet from the location. Preliminary discussions with the 1 RBU within 2,000 feet date all the way back to 2018, when our planned location at that time actually had their residents within 2,000 feet of the location as well as equipment. Since then, PDC has made several modifications to this location to mitigate any potential impacts to their residents. And this was explained to them in our more recent consultation in February of 2022. The landowner was appreciative of our efforts to obtain as much distance as feasibly possible from their residents, and at that time stated their only concern was temporarily losing a portion of their mountain view due to our temporary sound walls. However, the owner understands the necessity for these sound walls in mitigating additional potential impacts. PDC followed up again with this surface owner just last week to let them know we would be presenting this location to the COGCC and gather any additional input from them that could be conveyed to the commission. During this consultation, the owners conveyed to PDC that they were concerned with potential impacts to their property values because of the new location. PDC addressed this concern with explaining to them that the wells and production facility that are actually closer to their residents than the planned Bubba Federal location would have plans to be decommissioned as a result of our operations. This existing tank battery, as depicted as the yellow dot just south of RBU1 on the left side of your screen, is located about 275 feet from their residence. The wells that are planned to be decommissioned have at least 1 flow line that traverses a portion of this owner's property as well. And they were very pleased to hear that with the plugging of these wells, these flow lines could be removed from their property, and the existing tank battery would likely be decommissioned in the near future, increasing the value of their property. The owners have expressed to us that they are appreciative of PDC's efforts to make contact with them and provide detailed information regarding our proposed plans. PDC will continue to maintain communication with this RBU throughout each phase of the proposed operations. In addition to the multiple consultations with RBU1, PDC recognized that there were additional homes just outside 2,000 feet of the proposed Bubba federal location. While informed consents were not a requirement for these RBUs, PDC still felt it necessary to make attempts to consult with each of them in order to address any questions or concerns they may have. PDC did not identify any RBU owners just outside 2,000 feet of the working pad surface that were opposed to the proposed Bubba federal location. In speaking to the second RBU closest to the location, just over 2,000 feet from the working pad surface and just north of RBU1, the resident told us that he had no concerns of our plans and recently had an oil and gas location decommissioned that was approximately 200 feet from his residence. It was his understanding that this site was decommissioned in anticipation of new horizontal development, and he appreciated the fact that these older sites located much closer to existing developments are being decommissioned and replaced with new sites further from homes. This was generally the feedback we received from a majority of the neighborhood outreach conducted in this area. PDC applied this same philosophy of extensive neighborhood outreach to our Trippett location as well, which is depicted on the right side of the screen. The Trippett location has 2 RBUs, 1 abandoned RBU, and 1 building unit located within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface. PDC conducted multiple consultations with each of the 2 RBUs within 2,000 feet, as well as a tenant currently residing in one of the 2 RBUs. Neither the RBUs nor the tenant expressed any concerns with PDC's planned Trippett development, evidenced by their willingness to all sign informed consent packets in support of PDC's plans, as depicted by the green stars on the screen. In addition to obtaining 100% of informed consents from RBUs within 2,000 feet of the working pad surface, PDC conducted additional outreach to RBUs just outside 2,000 feet of the Trippett location as well. And similar to the outreach conducted with RBUs just outside 2,000 feet of the Bubba location, PDC did not receive any negative feedback or concerns about our planned development. PDC has also made several attempts to go door to door along the respective haul routes for each location to ensure residents along these routes have a contact at PDC to call should they have any issues at all. The majority of the feedback PDC received along these haul routes is that these residents were familiar with PDC's operations due to other locations PDC has conducted operations on in the area. And so long as PDC continues to maintain these roads as we have for past operations, they have no concerns at all. With that, I'll hand it over to Meredith Knopf to provide the commissioners with detailed information regarding the best-in-class BMPs PDC plans to utilize for our operations associated with each of these locations.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, commissioners and staff, for your time today and for your review of this application. Next slide. I wanted to start today by reviewing how we intend to build and operate these locations. PDC will build and operate these facilities using the same BMPs, including the agreed upon ozone BMPs, employed for the facilities under PDC's Guanella cap. These facilities will be tankless hydrocarbon storage facilities with all compression driven by line power and oil, gas, and water takeaway. As Corey stated, PDC intends to follow all BMPs regardless of location and or proximity to RBUs. We will also utilize the same construction equipment that you see to build subdivisions or highway expansions. PDC does not own this equipment. However, the vendor that does 80% of PDC's work in constructing new pads does utilize all Tier 4 engines. We are also currently working with our other vendors that we utilize to understand the makeup of their fleets. The drilling at these locations will utilize electricity. Since the original application was submitted, we have secured the necessary agreements with the utility to make this pivot to electrification possible. As a result, NOx emissions from pre-production will decrease from 3.14 tons NOx per well to 2.63 tons NOx per well, a 16% decrease in NOx emissions on a per well basis. An additional note on emission reductions, approximately 88 wells will be plugged in and reclaimed as part of these developments. While 3 of these wells are currently operated by PDC, it is estimated that an additional 0.2 to 0.5 tons of VOCs will be eliminated on an annual per well basis as a result. Next slide. Our primary goal is always to eliminate sources of impact, but where it cannot be fully eliminated, PDC has additional protections to reduce noise and light for our neighbors. PDC has a very robust noise monitoring program in place. An ambient survey has been conducted and temporary and permanent sound walls will be installed. Combined with the ambient survey, PDC is able to evaluate potential impacts in real time. When combined with our ambient survey, which we will conduct prior to construction, PDC will be installing continuous noise monitors during drilling and completions. Therefore, we can respond with mitigation strategies to minimize even further as needed. For lighting, during pre-production, light fixtures will be placed beneath the top of the sound wall and angled downward and will be LED to reduce sky glow. During production, no permanent lighting will be installed. PDC's tankless design significantly reduces the potential for spills and leaks during the production phase. AVO inspections are conducted daily for spills, leaks, and any other contaminants. It is PDC's intent to keep chemical storage, refueling, and staging more than 500 feet from any ordinary high water mark as applicable. Not only is PDC's goal to eliminate impacts, PDC also endeavors to improve the natural habitat where we operate. To this end, PDC has formed a partnership with the Butterfly Pavilion to research the efficacy of diverse plant species that attract pollinators during interim and final reclamation. PDC, in collaboration with the COGCC staff, intends to use the information conducted with the Butterfly Pavilion to enhance the interim reclamation program at the Trippet by creating pollinator habitats that will contribute to the food chain, economy, and overall well-being. Next slide. PDC also takes site security and safety very seriously. These locations will be equipped with 24/7 remote monitoring and state-of-the-art cameras to detect leaks as small as a deep exhale, as well as smoke, fires, and trespassers. Additionally, automation towers are installed to provide remote shutting capabilities, and guard shacks are on site during drilling and completion operations for additional site security. Next slide. PDC also has a best-in-class air monitoring program to ensure these facilities are operated to minimize and mitigate emissions associated with leaks and other non-routine emissions. PDC is compliant with the Air Pollution Control Division's air monitoring program. These facilities will have an air monitoring plan approved by APCD and will have 6 to 8 monitors dedicated to continuous VOC monitoring and passive benzene sorbate tube data collection through drilling, completions, and the first 6 months of production. PDC has collected over 1,600 benzene samples and over 15,000 hours of continuous VOC monitoring at 20 locations during pre-production and production activities. We've only had 1 exceedance related to an on-site spill that was detected and mitigated quickly. Lastly, PDC has publicly committed to continued emission reductions for all its assets in Colorado and Texas. Next slide. PDC plans to reduce methane intensity by 70% and greenhouse gas intensity by 74% by 2030, and to achieve zero routine flaring in our Texas assets. To further assist our dedication to emission reductions, PDC has also joined the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0 in 2022. The OGMP is a multi-stakeholder partnership sponsored by the United Nations, the Environmental Defense Fund, and Climate and Clean Air Coalition to improve the accuracy and transparency of methane emissions reporting. By joining this partnership and in the spirit of working with the governor on his ambitious NOx emission reduction targets and any new or pending changes to the attainment status in the DJ Basin, including PM 2.5, PDC is committed to reaching our targets and to exploring and implementing new technologies with our industry partners to continue to minimize our impact to human health and the environment in the communities where we work and live. I will now hand it back to Vanessa for PDC's closing thoughts.
Within the director recommendation of approval, there were 2 conditions of approval listed. The first COA is for the Bubba location to demonstrate compliance with Rule 604B, as Ms. Kara Weber presented to. PDC is in support of the revised COA and will submit a post-construction survey showing the measured distance from the edge of the wellheads and the nearest permanent production facility equipment to the RBU that is reported to be 2,001 feet from the planned wellheads via sundry notice within 10 days of spud. The second COA is associated with PDC's existing expired Form 2A and Form 2s for the previously permitted Stagecoach location, which falls within the Trippet development area. PDC is in agreement to file sundry notices to abandon these permits. Within this next section, we would like to review the OGDP questions received. The first question is related to the Bubba pad and the reach out efforts to the RBU owner. As Corey previously discussed in detail, PDC had multiple points of communication with this RBU owner, not only in the initial location planning stage, but also up until last week. There have been no immediate concerns expressed, and PDC is committed to continued communication with this RBU throughout our operations. The second question is related to the timing between operational phases. As previously shown on the operational timeline slide, there is only a maximum of a 1.25 month gap between drilling and completion operations. This gap is minimal to allow for high line power, time for drilling rig to move off location, conduct surveys for as drilled coordinates, water source and temp water line coordination, MLVT construction, and the completions crew setup. The third question relates to PDC's approved Guanella cap. The Bubba Trippet development was not far enough along in the process when the cap was submitted, as PDC was still evaluating wellbore orientation. However, as you have heard within the presentation, all of the same cap BMPs have been applied to this OGDP. As PDC is currently operating multiple rigs, these locations do not affect anything within the cap operational schedule. Next slide. The fourth question relates to drilling all wells from a single location. This single location was determined to be less protective, as it would have created more surface disturbance and impact to the surface owners, as well as affecting a substantially higher number of RBUs. The fifth question is related to CDPHE and high ozone days. CDPHE signed off on both locations in March of 2023. PDC is committed to ozone BMPs, including, but not limited to, minimizing vehicle and engine idling, reducing truck and worker traffic, and postponing the refueling of vehicles on forecasted high ozone days. The sixth and final question is related to the number of wells that will be plugged and reclaimed. The total number of wells listed on the 2B is in addition to the account provided within the Guanella cap submission. PDC is also committed to working with CDPHE to provide estimated emissions reductions from this PNR activity. Next slide. PDC has guaranteed that vigorous operational protections will be in place to ensure avoidance, minimization, and mitigation of adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. These practices include avoidance of sensitive receptors, a tankless hydrocarbon facility, oil, gas, and water takeaway, an electrified drilling rig, sound walls, daily inspections of production facilities, 24/7 remote monitoring, remote shut-in capability, and most importantly, ensuring a true net benefit of land back to the community. We would like to extend our appreciation to the staff, director, and commissioners for all the hard work on the Bubba Trippet OGDP. Thank you for your time this morning, and we welcome any questions that you might have regarding this application.
Mr. Prishala, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, just briefly. Thank you, Acting Chair Cross. I think as you've heard, PDC has its best management practices, including the electric rig, electric facility equipment, the quiet frac fleet, the distances from the RBUs, distances from water, that there's no high priority habitat near these locations, that there's a limited time frame on these occupations, just between short delay between drilling and completions, the air monitoring and detection, the remote shutting capabilities, and the other best management practices that have been presented to you here today. It's our position that these best management practices and the features of these locations satisfy Rule 301A as to these RBUs that are closer than 2,000 feet from the locations. And therefore, we request that you approve these locations in the application. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We've been going for almost an hour and 20 minutes now, so why don't we take a 10-minute break, return at 10:30, and commissioners can gather their questions together and prepare for deliberations at that time. Do we have Commissioner Ackerman back as well? We'll wait just a moment for him. There he is. All right. Thank you for the quick break. And at this time, we will open it up to commissioner questions. Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation and going through the questions the commissioners had. That was helpful. I was wondering if someone from CDPHE is available to discuss why there wasn't formal consultation on this, because there are RBUs within 2,000 feet and we're in a non-attainment area. And I'm appreciative of the additional commitments during the presentation. Just wanting CDPHE's viewpoint on, I feel like the additions kind of are in alignment with what we see in more formal consultations, and just wanting a kind of a head nod from CDPHE.
Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Commissioner McGowan. Let me see if we can have someone from CDPHE participate. Perhaps, and I hate to do this, I could also see if one of our OGLAs would be able to provide some input on that as we're looking for someone from CDPHE.
While she's trying to contact from someone from CDPHE, do you have additional questions, Commissioner McGowan?
Yes.
I apologize. I see Ms. Weber has raised her hand. Ms. Weber.
Hello, I just wanted to let you know that CDPHE is currently unavailable. However, we've been speaking with Rick this morning and he hasn't identified any issues as of yet.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify that the reduction in emissions from P&Ing the 88 wells will be reflected then in the Form 2B so that we can include it in the cumulative impacts reporting. So I saw that there were some estimates that you all had, and then an agreement to work with CDPHE and figuring out the total amount, and just wanting to make sure that that will be reflected in the Form 2B so that we can reflect it annually in our cumulative impacts reporting.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's correct.
Okay. And then there was agreement to the ozone BMPs. And I'm assuming that for the two items, the reflection of the emissions reductions from the P&Ing and the ozone BMPs, that because we've discussed them today, they are now considered part of the application. We don't have to do a condition of approval or adding anything. Is that, I don't know if I need help with Kyle from this or Lauren.
Ms. Mercer.
You are on mute.
Sorry, I had the double mute going on. So just to clarify your question, it was the commitment to note the emissions reductions from P&Ing those wells on the Form 2A, whether we need to add a condition of approval or anything formal. Was that the question? Yes, I think we don't need to add any sort of BMP or condition of approval for that. I think staff and the operator are clear that that will be included, and that's enough.
AAG Mercer, then for the ozone BMPs, will we just add those as BMPs since they were discussed and agreed to today?
So perhaps I was under the impression that those were already agreed upon and on the Form 2A. Is that not the case? Maybe Ms. Weber or the applicant could clarify that.
Ms. Weber.
The ozone BMPs were not on the 2A previously, since there was not a CDPHE consultation, but we are happy to send them over to COGCC, to Ms. Kira, and have them added.
Thank you for that clarification. And so yes, Commissioner McGowan, it would be appropriate to ensure that those are added, and in any motion at the conclusion of deliberations, we should note the addition of those ozone BMPs.
Okay, thank you. I think you guys answered all my questions as part of your presentation, so I appreciate that. Thanks.
Ms. Weber, I did notice that you had your hand raised. I wasn't sure if you wanted to speak on anything else.
Yes, I'd like to apologize. I'd like to clarify for the record that Rick Coffin is a member of the CDPHE team.
Thank you. Are there additional commissioner questions? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you. Appreciate the application. lots of information, very thorough. Appreciate that a lot. I did just have a couple of general questions and some clarifications. And so my understanding, and this perhaps is from Ms. Weber as well as the applicant. But as per rule 604B3 that's being utilized for one of the sites, which would indicate that at least in the COA, and at least what I'm hearing the operators say, is that any wells and permanent production equipment will be located greater than 2,000 feet from the existing RBU in the area. And production equipment, permanent production equipment is not a clear term for me, at least, in understanding that it actually meets the siting requirements of rule 604B3, which indicates that any wells, tanks, separation equipment, or compressors proposed on the oil and gas location will be located more than 2,000 feet from all RBUs or high occupancy building units. So I just wanted to confirm with the applicant that that truly was the intent, was to locate all of that equipment further than 2,000 feet away, as that's, for me, clear that it meets the requirements of the rule.
Yes, Commissioner Messner, we can confirm that it was all production facility equipment, including the wells, tanks, separation equipment that is stated within the rule.
Okay, thank you. I assumed that, but I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. I did have and this is just a general question, but on if we could pull up page 25 of your presentation. Oops. Had it there for a second. Great, thank you. And again, I really appreciate you highlighting all the different ways that you're mitigating adverse impacts. But I was unsure what I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th bullet point is, which is oil-based drilling fluid not being used in active mud system will be stored in closed upright tanks. So I guess what's the difference between drilling mud, drilling fluid? How's that treated different than, well, I guess I'm assuming that it's still the utilization of the group 3 oil-based mud. And so I'm just trying to understand kind of how that all works together, just for my information.
Yeah, Commissioner Messer, thanks for the question. This is Brian Murray, Director of Planning Well Execution. So just to make sure I'm understanding your question, your number 6, you're talking about drilling fluid versus drilling mud in our active mud system.
Right.
We're talking about storing chemicals or additives, because throughout the drilling of a well, you have to continue making up your mud depending upon the parameters and what you're drilling. So what we're going to do is, this is a BMP that we do all the time, is we're going to have upright tanks that are closed, so they're not going to have any sort of emissions coming off of them on location.
Okay, so it's just a specific style of storage that you're utilizing. Is that my understanding?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure I could picture it.
Yes, sir.
Understand what you're proposing there. So thank you for that. And my last question is just better understanding the interactions that PDC has had with the ditch company and how PDC helped alleviate their concerns, and to PDC's knowledge, whether there's any additional concerns associated with what my understanding is some proposed retention ponds or any potential impacts to their agricultural irrigation operations.
Yeah, I can take that one, and might have Brian DeRose jump in if needed. But yeah, we received the notice from Weld County. They had commented on the application and had concerns regarding our drainage plans for the Trippett location specifically. And PDC did go back and conduct a full redesign of our drainage plan to retain all stormwater on that site in order to meet Weld County code and give that ditch assurance that no runoff would came off that site could make it to that ditch.
Okay, and to your understanding, the ditch company was okay with your proposed plans?
Yeah, to our knowledge, yes.
Okay. Those are the questions I have. I did also just agree with Commissioner McGowan that I did find it unique that CDPHE chose not to consult on this particular application, as it has all the elements of applications that they've typically provided consultation on in the past. I will note that they are not required to consult. They have the ability to waive that consultation, but and that's not indicative of any kind of BMPs that you're proposing. I think that the BMPs that you're proposing are strong BMPs, but I did find it odd that they chose not to consult.
Commissioner Ackerman, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any that haven't been addressed already. Thank you.
I just want to touch on a couple points here. The first is, could you go into a little bit more detail on the use of wellbore spacing units? Specifically, why did you choose to use a wellbore spacing unit and the development of drilling and spacing units and wellbore spacing units?
Yep, thank you for the question. We felt if we didn't add the wellbore spacing units that we would be leaving behind reservoir. So the goal for us is to avoid waste and protect correlative rights with those wellbore spacing units.
And you didn't want to just use just create a larger DSU instead of using the WSUs?
No, there's existing overlapping spacing units already to the north and the south of the proposed developments. And we felt that was the fairest and balanced way to incorporate the ownership equally, kind of in between developments.
Okay, that's helpful. And a clarification, we talked a little bit about the multiple occupations, kind of that month to month and a half break there. I just want to confirm that sound walls and that kind of equipment is going to remain up during that interim period.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Cross. Yes, that is the intent with the schedule laid out. We will keep sound walls up in between drilling and completion activities.
Okay. And with respect to the sound walls, could you touch on a little bit why there's different size sound walls?
The sound walls are placed for a noise mitigation plan, and there is an ambient done of the area. And then it's an actual engineered design on what it would need to take on the different types of sound walls, height, type, all of the things in order to make mitigation. Okay.
I just wanted to confirm if it was an engineering issue, if it was something that was requested by the RBU owners, etc. Okay.
No, engineered sound design.
Right. Perfect. And could you also touch on a little bit communications with the building unit owner on the TRIPIT location as opposed to the RBU owner?
Are you referring to the tenant?
Yes, not the tenant. There's the two RBUs, but there's also the building unit, the non-residential building unit.
Oh, understood. Yeah, the building unit is a active trucking company who actually coincidentally does do a majority work related to oil and gas operations. We consulted with them, I believe, back in 2020 when we first started looking at this area. And then with our follow-up consultations just last week, spoke to them again. Really no concerns whatsoever about the proposed TRIPIT plans.
And I want to touch on a little bit. You talked about a net 82.2 acres for what's going to be reclaimed and 88 wells being plugged and abandoned. But I wanted to touch on a little bit some of the facilities related to that. I believe I heard some of the facilities could be and would likely, including tank batteries, would be reclaimed. Is there a proposal to do that? Are they owned by PDC? Are they owned by other operators?
Thanks, Commissioner Cross. I can take that. The majority of these wells are actually owned by another operator, so we don't know fully their plan. Okay. They will follow COGCC rules, I assume, in the reclaim of all those wells and or associated facilities. So typically it's pretty normal. If all the wells are PNR'd, that facility will also be PNR'd as well. Okay. But I can't speak to their exact plans.
And to confirm, are the reductions in those P&As, is the facilities, is there any reduction in emissions included in the 2B for those, or is it just for the wells?
The wells are, that's another great question, Commissioner. So the wells, we assume a 0.2 to 0.5 ton VOC per well. So that's the production that is being made from that well going through that facility. So it is tied, those emission reductions are tied to the facility by a reduction of production.
Okay. That is helpful. And then lastly, I just wanted to ask about the reclamation and the increased pollinators being used. Is this the first time you're doing this in conjunction with the butterfly pavilion, or is this something that you're planning on moving forward based on how this goes, or kind of this is a new best practice that you guys are doing?
Yes, thank you. We've been actually working with the Butterfly Pavilion for several years now, partly through our acquisition with Great Western, and then they had 2 sites that they were working with on an interim reclamation basis. And then PDC volunteered 2 pieces of property as well to conduct the study on. So we're currently about 2 to 3 years in on a pilot with Great Western, and then little over 1 year in with the pilot with PDC owned facilities. So we've actually consulted with the Butterfly Pavilion and COGCC. We've started those initial conversations to kind of discuss how best to utilize this information to better kind of create more diversity and help the pollinator species in Northeast Colorado.
I just thought that was rather interesting, so I wanted to see if this was something new or something ongoing. But thank you for the answers. Are there any other questions from commissioners? Okay. Seeing none, let's move into deliberations. Do any commissioners have deliberative comments? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Commissioner Cross. I think this is a good application. I appreciate the work that PDC has done on this. I think there's a lot to like in this application. It is, a location that does bring into play alternative location analysis. It brings into play residential building units inside 2,000 feet. I think the applicant has appropriately applied the different siting requirements associated with 600 series rules that we have. I think that their proposed BMPs, around tankless design, electrification of drilling operations and production facilities, the consolidation of locations, previously contemplated locations into one, I think is a strong BMP and consideration for this application. I also really appreciate the offsetting retirement of 88 legacy wells and associated facilities, as well as the associated reclamation of 106 acres associated with this application. I think the presentation was thorough. I think the application was thorough. I appreciate staff's work on this and working with the operator. And from this commissioner's standpoint, I believe that this application meets the rules and requirements, and I would vote to approve it.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with Commissioner Messner on all counts. I thought I always appreciate PDC's inclusion of best management practices. I think PDC has a great suite of best management practices, and I'm glad, Mr. Chair, that you brought up the pollinators discussion as well. I was going to mention that during deliberations and ask PDC to keep us apprised of your results there. I think that's another best management practice that PDC is leading on, and so I wanted to express my appreciation for that. I am grateful that you adequately addressed the questions that we had put out beforehand, and particularly appreciate the commitment to continue to coordinate with nearby RBU owners, whether they technically are within or just outside of the impacted area. I think that's a great approach, and appreciate and continue to encourage you to do that. That said, Mr. Chair, I also am supportive of this application. I appreciate we didn't talk a lot about the carrying away of produced water, gas, and oil all by pipelines, but again, this is a huge reduction in impacts to truck traffic. We've gotten so used to PDC proposing that on all fronts that we barely touched on it, but wanted to also mention that as well. So thank you for the great work. Thank you for your coordination with staff, and I am in support of this application.
Any other comments? Do we have any motions?
I'll move approval of the application as presented with the addition of the conditions of approval that were presented by staff.
And can I make a friendly amendment to also add the ozone BMPs that were discussed today?
Yes.
Second.
Mr. Chair, may I, or I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak over Commissioner McGowan. I was just going to ask the Commission's indulgence to further clarify that motion, just to make sure that that staff is clear on what's being proposed here. So that would be a motion to approve the application with the addition of the 2 conditions of approval in the director's recommendation, with condition of approval number 1 revised as discussed during today's hearing. In addition, it would be the addition of 3 ozone BMPs, which are that on forecasted high ozone days, the operator will 1, minimize vehicle and engine idling, 2, reduce truck traffic and worker traffic, and 3, postpone the refueling of vehicles.
That is my understanding.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval. Any additional deliberations? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for that. And I believe that is the last thing that we have on our agenda for today. So unless there's any other questions or comments, I would encourage a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time and work today.